Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on Bonds and Stories, we retell those moments honest every day, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. In Texas, we don't air our laundry, we starch it. By late afternoon, the South Congress light slows to a honeyed crawl outside my studio window, and the cicadas wind themselves up like they're paid by the decibel. I close my laptop, take a long sip of Topo Chico, and watch the cursor blink over the last line of a brand brief. My name is Maren Cole, and I run a 4-person design studio that survives on caffeine trust and invoices paid on time. The invoices matter most. I grew up 20 minutes west where Lake Travis throws back the sun like a hand mirror, and families measure success in square footage and the number of volunteer boards your mother chairs. Evelyn, my mother chaired most of them. She still does. She's the kind of woman who can say, "Bless your heart," and make a grown man check if his fly is down. Robert, my dad used to be the business mind behind a private hospital network, spreadsheets, contracts, speaking fees. He liked certainty, or liked to look like he did. My sister Sloane arrived 2 years after me with a halo of perfect timing. AP credits varsity captain later, a COO title at a startup that sends protein shakes to your door in boxes made of smug cardboard. I learned early that I wasn't the headline act. I was the graphic at the bottom that made the layout hold. In 7th grade, I won my first ribbon for a poster nobody asked for a field of bluebonnets I made out of grocery receipts and magazine ads. Sloane won science fair the same week with a water purification project that could have cleaned Barton Springs with a bendy straw. Mom took out a full-page announcement in the neighborhood newsletter, a photo of Sloane under a banner. I was in the corner of the picture holding my collage like a casserole. Those were the years when compliments at our house came with a measuring tape. "Stand up straight," Mom would say. "Smile with your eyes." She kept a sewing kit in the kitchen drawer thread for hems, safety pins for emergencies, and a tape for telling the truth about your waist. Dad's approval was quieter and somehow harder. He came to Sloane's matches in a folding chair that never squeaked. He missed my art show because mergers don't schedule themselves, kiddo, but he bought me a set of pencils that smelled like cedar and made everything feel briefly possible. I built a life with fewer measuring tapes. My apartment in Bolden Creek has scuffed floors that shine after rain. The studio is 3 blocks down, white walls, plants that refuse to dye a battered conference table. I sanded myself after a YouTuber told me to go with the grain. We design brands for coffee chains, museums, and the kind of nonprofits that believe color can change behavior. It pays the rent and some months a little more. The morning it changed, my phone lit with Dad's name. We had been texting, not talking for months, links to articles, a thumbs up to a holiday photo. "Can you meet for coffee?" he asked. "Just us." He added, "Don't mention it to your mother." In our family, secrecy is a language. I'm fluent against my will. We met at a cafe near Zilker that never learned how to be trendy. Formica tables, a chalkboard menu, the scones the size of softballs. Dad wore a navy sport coat, even though it was already hot enough to fry your patience on the hood of your car. He looked smaller inside it. The man who could once fill a room with his voice now sat like he was trying not to take up any space at all. He wrapped his hands around a coffee he didn't drink. "Your mother thinks we're fine," he said. The sentence arrived with a wobble. "We're not." He told me about an investment in a chain of urgent care centers that went sideways, insurance reimbursements that dried up taxes that had been optimized too aggressively by a friend who now answered calls through a lawyer. Their savings had been eaten by a year of pretending. The bank wanted to see a plan or see the house. I listened the way you listen when a contractor tells you the beam you thought was decorative is carrying the load. I kept my voice steady. "What are you asking?" "$200 $800 a month," he said, and then he was suddenly very interested in the sugar packets. "For the mortgage." "Until I can unwind a few things." 6 months. A year at most. He added like a man throwing a rope from a sinking boat to a dock he built and never maintained. "I know I wasn't around in the ways that counted. You were right about your career. I was wrong." The apology landed in me like a warm coin dropped into a cold palm. Not enough to spend, but something real. I stared at the cup sweating onto the saucer. A year of $2,800 would mean fewer risks at the studio, fewer dinners out, and the new iMac staying in someone else's cart. It would mean choosing quiet over pride. "I'll do it," I said. His shoulders loosened like a fist unclenching. "But I'm paying the bank directly," I added. "And we put it in writing. I won't be the secret." He nodded, relief and shame braided in his eyes. "Thank you," he said, and looked down again as if the word itself might flash too bright. I set up the transfer that afternoon ACEH from my account to a lender with a pleasant anonymous name. In my accounting software, I labeled the expense vendor retainer, Lakeside. It was a lie that let me breathe. My bookkeeper would think we'd brought on a subcontractor who never answered emails. I told myself it was temporary, like a hand pressed to a wound until help arrived, when I stopped by my parents' house that weekend with a bag of H-E-B groceries. Coffee paper towels, the brand of cereal Dad pretends he doesn't eat at midnight. Mom was arranging sunflowers in a vase as tall as a 14-year-old. The house in Westlake Hills is the kind that appears in real estate listings with words like generous and meticulous. It smells faintly of furniture polish and a more expensive life. Mom kissed the air near my cheek and complimented the sandals I bought on sale last year. Her water glass left a ring on a coaster that said blessed in gold script. Ran into the editor from the neighborhood magazine, she said, fluffing petals. She wants to do a little feature on families with daughters in leadership. You and Sloan together would be darling. Sloan's face lives in magazines with no help. She is good on camera in a way that makes cameras behave. I imagine the photo Sloan crossing her arms with practiced warmth, me tucked beside with a grin that says I know fonts. I smiled anyway. "That's nice," I said. I didn't mention the transfer that had left my account that morning like a small boat pushed into a current. At my apartment that night, I made a list like I do when the world threatens to go out of focus. Cancel the extra software licenses. Push the iMac purchase to Q4. Raise the retainer on the coffee chain by 5%, and add 2 hours of strategy they already use but never see. I texted Tara, my project manager, that we keep travel light this quarter. Copy that she wrote back, followed by a gif of a budget spreadsheet wearing sunglasses. The first mortgage draft hit the following Tuesday. I felt it leave. I'd planned for the hollow feeling, and it still surprised me the way the body protests even when the mind agrees. I closed my accounts, opened Illustrator, and spent 40 minutes outlining the letter R in 6 different weights until the lines felt like something a person could stand on. Work steadies me. So does the click of a well-set baseline grid. In the weeks that followed, Dad and I met on the down-low parking lot's cafes 2 zip codes away, a picnic table behind a church where nobody I knew would walk a dog. He brought manila folders and promises. I brought questions he sometimes answered. Mom was always busy, which in our house is a word that wears perfume. She chaired a fundraiser and organized a neighborhood beautification day and delivered baked goods that tasted like competence. If there was a budget conversation, it happened in a room with the TV on. I didn't correct her when she bragged about Sloan's latest profile in a business journal, or when she patted my arm and called my studio, "Your little shop," like it sold candles next to the register. Sloan texted me selfies from boardrooms with ceilings higher than our high school gym winking captions about deal terms. I hearted them mostly because I couldn't think of a neutral face. By month 2, the transfers felt like a new bill with an old name. I trimmed where I could and took on a museum campaign that would make a nice case study and not much else. I learned to be content with the sound of an espresso machine instead of a weekend trip. I replaced an evening cocktail with a walk past yards where live oaks throw lace shadows on concrete and toddlers ride scooters dangerously close to a future they can't see yet. One night, after a late client call, I pulled a stack of envelopes from my backpack bank. Letters, my own budget printed and color-coded a copy of the transfer schedule backed up to the cloud in my stubborn hope. The papers made a modest sound when I tapped them square on the counter. Paper doesn't weigh much until you read it. Then it's something else entirely. I slid the stack into a plain white folder and clipped it shut. It looked like any other errand waiting for morning ordinary, unremarkable necessary. Outside, the cicadas lifted their 1,000-voice chorus. Inside, the apartment hummed with the quiet that comes after a decision has been made and before anything else has the nerve to happen. The second transfer left my account on a Tuesday, precise as a metronome. I marked it close the banking tab and let the espresso machine hiss loud enough to drown the part of my brain that keeps a ledger on me. Work filled the day. The gaps were where the math lived. At night, I'd lace my shoes and walk past porches strung with Edison bulbs, dogs exhaling into the heat sprinklers stitching arcs over grass nobody sits on. Austin pretends it's laid back. The property taxes know better. My parents did not discover frugality. The HOA newsletter arrived with a glossy write-up crowning Evelyn Cole Community Steward of the Quarter, flanked by photos of her arranging peonies like she'd invented stems. She chaired a Garden Glow fundraiser and posted a boomerang of champagne flutes clinking at golden hour. Robert texted me a photo of Duke, their aging lab asleep beneath the kitchen island. The marble shone like it had a trust fund. He started avoiding nouns around money speaking in verbs, and whether something's moving we're working on it should clear. I trimmed my own life to fit. New iMac deferred. 2 SAS seats we weren't using canceled. The coffee chain's retainer edged up 5%, with 10% more strategy, which is to say the same work in better shoes. Tara and I rearranged timelines so travel became a zoom window with a reflection you try not to stare at. Nothing heroic, just the kind of tightening you feel in the jaw. In the middle of this, an envelope thick with cardstock slid under my studio door. Cream paper letterpress ink you could feel with your thumb. 35 years. One more promise. A vow renewal and lakeside gala at the Westlake Country Club. Sloan co-chaired the event committee. Her name was on the back with a row of donors and a band I'd heard on a TV show. The family group text lit confetti hearts a link to a dress boutique Sloan swore pulled miracles. I RSVP'd yes and phoned the club. A manager with a radio clipped to his belt answered in a voice that had seen worse. I gave him my card and asked to pre-settle the family table dinner wine whatever nonsense gets ordered when the string lights kick in. No check at the end, I said. Make it invisible. He repeated my instructions back to me like he was reading them off a teleprompter. Invisible is a service they sell. The week before the gala, Dad and I met behind a church on a picnic bench that listed gently toward the pecans. He spread out a folder of paths forward, which looked like a cross between a flowchart and a wish. An investment was almost liquid, a tax situation nearing resolution. He thanked me twice and apologized once both, in the voice you use in hospitals and airports. He offered cash to cover the transfers until things normalize. I told him to keep it and bring me numbers instead. You don't have to, he started. I already am, I said, and we let the sentence sit there until the wind moved it. The night of the event, the club looked like a catalog had inhaled. Lanterns bobbed along the path. A string quartet warmed up on a veranda that never sees bad weather. Lake Austin lay flat and dark beyond the lawn, absorbing conversations and reflections in equal measure. Waiters pinballed through the cocktail hour with trays of things on toast. The men wore suits the color of complicated decisions. The women had necklines that let the diamonds do their job. Evelyn arrived in champagne silk with a shawl that refused to wrinkle. She kissed the air near my cheek and whispered, "Darling, you look fresh," which is the compliment she gives when a dress isn't doing math for your body. Robert shook my hand like he was my banker, and then remembered hugged me and tucked his posture back into place. Sloan swept in late with a single perfect curl, defying gravity, and a committee of admirers orbiting her in practiced ellipses. She air-checked the room like a pilot. "How's the shop?" she asked, smiling. Sloan calls my studio a shop, like we sell mugs at the counter. I said busy and let her talk about closing a Series B, the term sheet. Actually elegant, the founder finally listening. Dinner lived up to the brochure burrata that had been sung to steak that surrendered at the sight of cutlery desserts plated like blueprints of wealth. The band slid from standards to something with a backbeat, and no one noticed how seamlessly it happened. Toasts rose and fell. Board members' old friends, a neighbor, who told a children's table story that had aged like milk. My mother gleamed under gratitude. She thanked the committee with the diction of a woman who practiced on the drive over. She looked at Robert like history had been kind and said it again. Then wine did what wine does. "You know," Evelyn said, hand on my forearm, voice pitched to the audience directly across from us. "Your sister's keynote last month. My goodness, standing room only." She squeezed. "It's remarkable the impact she has. You should think about speaking more. About branding for women who need help. Her smile held. Such a sweet niche. Across the table, Sloane performed a mural, the kind that polishes a compliment as it accepts it. Mom, she laughed. Marin's work is. Important Mom finished like a teacher offering the answer after the pause. Of course. But isn't it nice your projects let you keep your little place on South Congress so... You. She turned her glass slowly on the linen. Renting is freedom at your age, I suppose. The room hushed without getting quiet. Band Forks Lake, everything kept making noise, while the air around our table stilled. Robert's jaw moved, and then didn't. Sloane looked at me like she wanted to rewrite the last 20 seconds with a different pen. I watched my mother the way light found the high planes of her face, the little creases that makeup only softens. She didn't know the cost of her sentence. She didn't know the cost of anything. I reached into my bag and set a white folder by her bread plate. It was the kind you buy in a pack of 10. I slid it forward with 2 fingers and clicked the metal clip open. Checks and transfer confirmations lifted slightly in the conditioned air corners at attention. Dates marched down the page. 11 months, $2,800 each, the lender's logo in the top right, the memo lines neat as stitched hems. Behind them, a roof repair invoice, the property tax receipt, with its red ink stamp that never pretends to be friendly. What is this? Evelyn asked, not touching it. Proof, I said. Robert reached. His face thinned in a way I've only seen once when Duke got hit by a delivery van, and the vet looked tired before he spoke. He skimmed the top page, then the next, his finger landing on an amount, as if he could hold it down. Marin. He said not loudly, just enough for the 4 of us you didn't. I did, I said. Every month. It drafts on Tuesdays. Evelyn looked at Robert. What is she talking about? He tried for the soft version. We've had assistance. From our daughter. She blinked a tiny furious flutter. No. Sloane pulled the folder toward her, her nail catching the clip. She read faster than anyone I know. You could see comprehension travel across her face in clean lines. Date sums the absurdity of a country club centerpiece in front of a balance due. The house you're sitting in stays yours because I send money you don't see. I said, still quiet. The roof doesn't leak because a contractor cashed a check with my name on it. The county didn't add penalties this spring because I paid what was overdue. Evelyn's shoulders went very straight. She picked up her napkin and then set it back down as if she'd decided the fabric had failed her. This is highly inappropriate. So are secrets, I said. Around us, a waiter asked someone whether they wanted coffee. The quartet slipped into something softer. Lake water lapped the stone the way it has always done, unimpressed by land deeds. Robert pressed a hand flat on the folder, gentle, as if the paper were skittish. I should have told you, he said to my mother, eyes still on the ledger of what I'd done. I should have told both of you. You told me to trust you, I said, so I trusted you with my terms. Bank drafts, documentation. Sloane set the papers down like they were warm. Is this why you passed on that museum pitch in Dallas? She asked me, voice steady, eyes not. It's why I skipped weekends and bought the cheaper coffee, I said. It's why my assistant hasn't had a raise in 6 months. It's why every Tuesday feels like the first breath after a wave. Evelyn swallowed. The gold cross at her neck rose and fell, rose and fell. People are looking? She whispered. They were already looking, I said. They just weren't seeing. I closed the folder, slid it back to the edge of the table. The table's taken care of tonight, I added, because that was also true. Eat, drink, smile for the photos. I stood pushed to my chair in until it kissed the tablecloth. Happy anniversary. No one called my name. They didn't have to. It was written on enough lines of enough documents to echo by itself. I walked off the terrace and onto the flagstone path, past lanterns that made pockets of light you could step in and out of. Out by the water, a couple took selfies with the lake, pretending to be moonlight. The band played something that asked the crowd to sway. I kept going, shoes careful on the slope, the night thick with cut grass and sweet vanilla magnolia, my breath making small clouds of resolve in the heat. The valet stand glowed at the edge of the circle drive. I handed over my ticket and watched a college kid jog toward a row of sedans. Behind me, laughter rose silverware chimed, and a cheer went up for a joke I didn't need to hear. When my car slid to the curb, I thanked the kid and slid into the seat that still remembered my shape. The folder waited on the passenger side plain and obedient, its clip catching a glint of light as I pulled the door shut. By the time the valet lights shrank in the rear view, my phone started doing what phones do when a room has heard something it wasn't meant to. Missed calls, then texts. From Dad, "Come by tomorrow, please." From Sloan. "We should meet, all of us." Nothing from Evelyn. Silence can be eloquent. Silence can be... I slept like people do after a storm, one ear open, jaw tight. Morning smelled like coffee and lemon cleaner. I stacked the folder on the counter, slid it into my bag, and drove west where the roads tilt and the houses learn to face the view. The Cole house did what it always does, squares its shoulders and offers you a version of normal. Robert opened the door before I knocked. He'd shaved too close. The living room was air-conditioned to museum-level sun pressed flat against the glass, the leather couch reflecting everything it could. Evelyn sat with her ankles stacked, hands laced as if in prayer. Sloan paced the length of the rug phone face down in her palm like a truce. We didn't hug. We arranged ourselves. Dad cleared his throat and took the chair opposite us, the chair he uses for winning arguments. He didn't look like a man who wins arguments. "I owe you the whole picture," he said, and opened a binder thick with tabs the color of dental floss. He started at the beginning. You pick when the real beginning is embarrassing. The urgent care investment reimbursements, lagging margins, fantasy thin. The tax strategy that turned into a letter with a seal that doesn't smile. A second mortgage sold as flexibility. Lines of credit braided into something that looked like rope until you pull. We kept thinking we could... bridge. His hand found and lost the armrest. Your mother needed things to look as they looked. Evelyn didn't blink. "Everyone needs stability," she said, each word ironed. Stability is not the word Sloan said too even. She picked up the binder, flipped, scanned. "Did you or did you not ask me last year for $20,000 for a vendor deposit on a clinic expansion?" Robert's eyes closed for 2 long seconds. "I asked if you could advance it short term. I thought." "You thought I wouldn't dig," she said. "I did. There was no expansion. There was a past due." The room held the word a beat too long. My mother made a small sound, the kind you make when a heel catches carpet. I set my folder beside the binder. Paper met paper. "He asked me for the mortgage," I said quietly. "He asked you for the cars. Different story, same hole." Robert didn't fight it. He folded, not dramatically, just truthfully, like a hinge that finally remembers its job. I kept thinking I could fix it without breaking anything else. Sloan let out a breath that had been waiting months for an exit. The hard varnish of her voice softened. "Do you have any idea what it's like to be everybody's proof?" she asked the middle distance. "To never walk into a room without knowing you're a mirror for someone else's story." She laughed once without humor. "My calendar is an altar to performance. 70-hour weeks look clean on LinkedIn. They don't feel clean." Evelyn turned towards her. "You enjoy your work," she said as if reciting. "You were made for..." "I was made." "Yes," Sloan said quick. "That's the problem." The air in the room shifted like a front blew through. "And you," my mother said, pivoting to me, grasping for the familiar shape of a narrative that always soothed her. "Marin, you have your studio, your little... Oh, your..." "Stop," I said not loudly. "Please." She did. My name hung between us without adjectives for once. Robert went pale mid-inhale. The sentence he'd been building lost scaffolding. A sheen climbed his forehead. A tremor opened in his left hand. He pressed 2 fingers to his neck, missed, pressed again. "I'm fine," he said to no one. He wasn't. His breath sawed. "Dad," I said, already moving. "Where's your..." "Kitchen," he managed, tapping his wrist. "Top cabinet." Little white. Sloan was on her feet, before I was already at the pantry, yanking open the door that hides 100 contraptions they bought to prove they were the kind of people who juice. She found the blood pressure cuff in a basket labeled seasonal, because of course she did. I grabbed the pill bottle with Robert Cole on the label, the one the cardiologist must have handed over with a look. We sat him forward. Evelyn held a glass of water with 2 shaking hands. I steadied one. Sloan wrapped the cuff hit. Start. Watch the numbers climb and complain. The monitor beeped a rhythm like a metronome someone was messing with. Atrial flutter, or the panic's close cousin. I tipped a pill into Dad's palm, watched him swallow and vibrate, felt my own pulse trying to match his and failing. Call, I told Sloane. Nurse line. She already had it on speaker. A voice came through calm and scripted the tone that keeps people in chairs. Breathing exercises. Keep him upright. If symptoms escalate, ER. We followed the script. He steadied not to normal, but to safer. The cuff beeped again, less insulted this time. Evelyn dabbed his forehead with the corner of a napkin that had survived decades of holidays. Up close, I could see where her foundation ended, and her skin began a thin seam that always looked invisible across a dining room, but not across a crisis. I'm fine, he said again, smaller. No, I said also smaller. We sat a while without pretending the quiet was comfortable. The refrigerator cycled, the AC muttered, a delivery truck grumbled past with cardboard promises. When the color returned to Dad's face, he nodded once slow. I'm here, he said, as if checking. Evelyn stood abruptly as if sprung. I need air, she said, and left the room like a woman stepping off stage. The back door sighed. The porch swing squeaked its first hopeful squeak. I followed. Outside, heat laid its hand on the house. A mockingbird scolded a fence post. The backyard looked like a catalog shot. Hedges, squared pavers, righteous, a grill with more features than a car. Evelyn stood by the railing, palms flat on the wood, staring at the live oak like it had accused her. You embarrassed us, she said without turning. You embarrassed yourself, I said, and heard the iron in it. She let out a breath that sounded like giving up a small country. Maybe I did. We listened to leaves argue. A lawn service across the greenbelt hit a high note and maintained it. The swing creaked again. I sat. She stayed standing, the queen who forgot her crown. My mother measured me with a tape she said, finally still watching the tree. Did I ever tell you that every Saturday before pageant practice? Waist, hips, posture, yes, posture, can be measured if you're creative about it. She pinned elastic straps across my shoulders if I slumped. I learned it isn't a thing you are, it's a thing you hold. And if you drop it, you drop everything that matters. She looked at me then. The makeup had traveled, the woman underneath had not. When you were little and you drew on the backs of bills, she said I saw danger. The kind of softness my mother punished out of me. You looked like the person I might have been if no one had corrected me. I didn't know how to love that. I knew how to edit it. The swing found a rhythm under me. I didn't remember giving it. You were harder on me than on Sloane, I said. You know that. I do, she said quick. Sloane makes sense to me. She lines up. She arrives on time. You, she gestured with a failing grace. You refuse the script. You look at a thing and see how to make it new. That terrified me. So I translated fear into criticism because that language fits in public. She wiped her cheek with the back of one hand and inspected the result like evidence. I thought I was keeping you safe from the world. I was keeping you away from me. The words were not pretty. They didn't try to be. They stood there like furniture you can't move anymore. You don't get points for the diagnosis, I said. The swing slowed. But thank you for the sentence. We let that live between us, a low table we could set things on later. The door opened behind us. The house exhaled refrigerated air, and Sloane stepped onto the porch, balancing a glass of water and a look that had retired from broadcasting. He's steadier, she said to both of us. He wants company. We went back inside, not like a family in a commercial, but like people who'd run out of places to stand alone. Robert was at the kitchen table with the cuff still hugging his arm, the red imprint on his skin echoing something I couldn't name. He looked up and gave us the kind of smile you give when you're relieved not to be the only witness. I set my folder down. Sloane set the water down. Evelyn sat. The four of us arranged ourselves around the table that had held pies and grades and catalogs circled for other seasons. No one reached for a pen. The ice maker thundered and stilled. Robert cleared his throat. Thank you, he said to the wood to the room to us. His hand found mine, then let go, then found it again. I opened the folder. Paper squared to paper. The numbers waited the way numbers do, patient, indifferent, exact. For once, the silence between us didn't feel like a performance. It felt like the room had finally learned to tell the truth and was resting after the effort. The table held for us while the air conditioning leveled out and the ice in 4 glasses gave up. We didn't draft speeches, we drafted lines. Here, I said, sliding a single sheet between the placemats. Not a manifesto, just dates, amounts, and where money would move. My handwriting stayed even. Transfers continue only if I see statements. Direct from the bank. No summaries. I pointed, kept my voice soft. And we meet someone who knows how to tell the truth in numbers. Evelyn's eyes clicked to Robert, then back to the paper as if it might smudge. You mean an accountant? I mean a planner, I said. Someone who doesn't get paid to flatter. Robert nodded once, a man signing the thing he should have read last year. Fine, he said. I'll set it. He looked at me at the folder at his hands. Thank you, he added, like the room required a password. No one argued when the house entered the conversation. It arrived the way heavy things do, without ceremony, with gravity already attached. Sloane stood cross to the window and took in the view that had been underwriting a story for decades. If we list, she said quietly, we list fast. Evelyn's mouth shaped a protest and then lost the choreography. She reached for the water, swallowed, set the glass down with a small clink that sounded like surrender. I have boxes, she said almost to herself. In the attic. The next week had the feeling of new shoes, stiff, squeaking undeniably better than bare feet. We sat across from a planner in a narrow office that smelled like laser paper and peppermint tea. Hector Morales, the kind of man who labels his highlighters, ran a fingertip down a spreadsheet and asked plain questions until they produced plain answers. He didn't blink at the club dues. He circled them. He didn't shame. He shaved. By the end of the hour, numbers had lost their costume and stood there in their undershirts unembarrassed and exact. Transparency isn't a virtue here, Hector said, tapping the page. It's a tool. You use it, or you don't get to keep your tools. He printed copies, clipped them like a teacher, and handed them over. Paper again the same weight as the lies it replaces. Thursday, a therapist's office with woven rugs and chairs that forgave posture. Dr. Patel had the gentle stare of someone who has survived 4,000 family holidays by proxy. She asked us to describe each other without using achievements. The first minutes weren't pretty. Robert tried humor. Sloane tried debate. I tried being a diagram. Evelyn tried being past tense. Dr. Patel held up a palm and introduced a rule with the calm of a traffic cop. 3 sentences, she said, and no comparisons. We stumbled. We also made it through an hour without anyone leaving the building. Evelyn surprised me by showing up early for the second session, sitting with a paper cup of tea and an expression you usually only see on people looking at ultrasound photos. When Dr. Patel asked what brought her back, she answered without embroidery. I'm tired of hearing myself in my mother's voice. Her hand shook once and then steadied on the armrest a small visible truce. I took the other half of my life back to work, which is where I remember I'm useful. The museum campaign that had been a polite line on our pipeline turned into a wall-size interactive map for kids who like to touch what they're told to look at. We papered the studio with sketches, routes, icons, arrows that asked you to go somewhere and meant it. Tara kept the timeline like a drummer. Casey built prototypes that carried fingerprints proudly. On a Saturday morning, I drove to ATX Makerspace to laser-cut signage prototypes out of thin birch. The air inside tasted like sawdust and possibility. A man in a denim apron with a pencil parked behind one ear was arguing with a stubborn sheet of walnut. He had the posture of someone who lets wood teach him things. You're fine to take the big bed, he said without looking up. I'm losing an argument with this curve, and I enjoy losing if it learns me something, Marin, I said. Noah, he said, offering a hand that had known sandpaper intimately. His palm left a faint tattoo of cedar on mine. You a letter person or a shape person? Both, I said, on a good day. He grinned like that was the correct answer. We loaded files, watched the laser light draw instructions with patient heat. When a piece popped wrong, Noah laughed first, then fixed second. Everything's a draft, he said, and I liked that the sentence didn't ask for a reply. The museum's director cried at the soft launch, but in the good way, the way that makes you want to hand someone a napkin and a contract. After the crowd filtered out, she held my wrists and said, You made a room that lets children make decisions. I drove home with the windows down and let the smell of charred birch ride shotgun. Meanwhile, Westlake got louder in small ways. A for sale sign went into the lawn with a shy creak and a bright flyer box that Evelyn stocked and restocked like a merch table. She stopped buying flowers that screamed their price. The house held bowls of green limes instead. Robert started spending Tuesdays at the community center, coaxing forms into submission for people who found government websites more hostile than helpful. I caught him at the kitchen counter once with 3 pension brochures fanned out like cards and a neighbor in a John Deere cap nodding like church. He looked up at me and actually beamed. "We got him through it," he said, and the we landed in the room like a lamp switched on. Evelyn showed up in the East Side Arts Collective with a volunteer badge and a ponytail. I nearly dropped my coffee the first time I saw her in an old t-shirt, blue tape on her wrist, rolling primer over a wall that would hold a kids' gallery. She argued with the roller pole, then laughed at herself, the sound jagged and new. When a girl in a paint-splattered hoodie asked if the second coat mattered, Evelyn didn't recite perfection. She handed over the roller and said, "Let's see what the wall tells us." Paint freckles dotted her forearm like proof. At home, the attic learned new verbs. Sloan and I hauled down boxes that had labeled themselves over time, Holiday Miss Key Kitchen, and the mysterious save. We made a pile of trophies that had no idea what decade it was. Evelyn made a face at her own portrait from a pageant year I could name by the hairspray. "Put it in, consider," she said. That was progress defined to scale. An agent staged the house with a gentleness I appreciated. She took down the framed covers of magazines Sloan smiled from and left up a watercolor I'd done in 8th grade of the Greenbelt after a storm. I caught Evelyn looking at it longer than the minute required by nostalgia. "You made the water look like it keeps moving," she said, half to the glass, half to me. I told her water insists. Evenings got a different shape. Sometimes it was Chinese takeout at my place cartons sweating onto the table while we all learned how to eat and listen. Sometimes it was a walk around the block that ended with Duke barking at his arthritic reflection in a dark window. Sometimes it was nothing, which is its own shape when you're not performing. Sloan began appearing without tempo hair and a clip phone on Do Not Disturb. She sat on my stoop once with a legal pad and wrote, "What I actually care about" at the top, like she'd been dared. Halfway down the page, she stopped, looked at me and said, "Do you ever feel like you've been drafting in a lane you didn't pick?" "All the time," I said. We watched a delivery truck try to back into an alley with comic patience. Sloan scratched a box next to one item and didn't show me the list. That was fine. Not everything needs witnesses. Dr. Patel's office got easier to find. The second month, she asked each of us to say one thing we'd miss from the old life. Robert surprised us by answering first, knowing which fork to use without thinking, he said, and we laughed like we meant it. Evelyn said very small, "Being admired, and nobody told her why that was wrong." My turn came, and I said, "The clarity of anger," and watched Sloan nod like a metronome. We still had stalls. A Sunday dinner collapsed under the weight of a single sentence Evelyn threw without looking. I stood to leave. She caught my sleeve with 2 fingers and said I heard it the second it landed. The apology didn't fix the sentence. It did keep me in the room. At the studio, the campaign wrapped with kids dragging their parents through the map, choosing routes like they were choosing summer. We posted a case study with photos that smelled like glue sticks and victory. Tara rang a bell we keep in the corner for good days and bad ones. We ring it either way to stay honest. Noah stopped by with a strip of walnut he'd coaxed into a curve that belonged in a poem. "For your wall," he said, "or a shelf for a stubborn book." He leaned in the doorway and left a small constellation of sawdust on my mat. "You ever need a cut, call me," he said, and handed me a card with a smudge where his thumb had considered being clean. The house showed 3 times in one Saturday. I wasn't there, but I learned the rhythm by the texts, a flower emoji from Evelyn, a thumbs up from Robert, with a photo of Duke sleeping in the car like a hostage, a single period from Sloan that somehow meant we're in motion. I walked South Congress and let the storefronts throw me their reflections. In the glass, I looked like someone who had decided and then kept deciding. Late one night, after returning a client deck that landed exactly where it needed, I lay on the floor of my apartment and watched the fan make quiet weather. The room had that post-storm smell again, cleaner ionized, ready for ordinary air. I thought of the kitchen table at Westlake with its new stack of papers, Hector's smooth highlighters, Dr. Patel's 3-sentence rule paint drying on a wall that would hold children's work by morning. I could hear the cicadas start up again beyond the window, 1,000 engines agreeing on a key. The sound wasn't peace, it was proof of life. I let it fill the room until the ceiling got soft, then reached for the light and left things where they were. Tools out, lines drawn. Air moving. The cicadas had started early, tuning the dusk outside my windows while I set 4 plates on the little walnut table I'd sanded until it stopped arguing. The apartment smelled like roasted chicken and thyme, and a lemon tart that decided not to crack. I swapped the good glasses for the sturdy ones, the ones that forgive elbows, and tucked paper napkins under forks, the way my hands remembered from other kitchens. A knock that wasn't a knock. 2 light taps, a pause, meant Robert. He stood in the doorway with a grocery store bouquet and a grin he didn't apologize for. Traffic listened today, he said, as if that were a personal favor. He looked younger in the ways that don't show up in photographs, shoulders not braced for impact, eyes that landed and stayed. Behind him, Evelyn came in with a bakery box and paint on her cuticles, a pale confetti she hadn't noticed or hadn't scrubbed off on purpose. I brought the thing the teenagers ate the fastest last Saturday, she said, lifting the lid to reveal a sheet cake iced like a field green. Swirls, blue dots, a shaky white line that might be a path. Don't analyze the composition, she added, and almost laughed. Sloane arrived last in sneakers and a linen shirt that had lost the will to be crisp. She set a bottle of Texas Red on the counter and exhaled like a runner who'd found shade. No agenda, she said, palms up. I left it on my desk. We didn't say grace. We passed bowls. The chicken behaved, the salad tasted like it had learned something from olive trees, and the tart cut clean. The room made its own sound, Fork's low voices the hum of an AC unit that had decided to be a team player. We closed on Wednesday, Robert said, after 2 bites and a sip of water. The Westlake house had changed hands without a scene. He and Evelyn were in a 1-story bungalow near Tarrytown Crepe Myrtles, throwing tiny flags at the street. I keep reaching for a staircase that isn't there, he said, amused at his own muscle memory. And I can find everything in the kitchen because there isn't a 3rd drawer that pretends to be useful. Evelyn set her glass down precisely. The porch faces west, she offered measured. There's a dent in the railing I've decided to like. She lifted a shoulder. It looks like a story, and nobody asks which one. We ate. Sloane told a story about a founder who tried to pitch impact by adding the word community to every slide until the deck groaned under the weight. I said the quiet part out loud, she admitted, semi-pleased. Some rooms need someone to point to the emperor's socks. She smiled at me without finishing the thought. Later, after plates leaned into each other in the sink, I made coffee and sliced the field cake. The blue dots were meant to be flowers. On the plate, they looked like small planets that had agreed to orbit. When I handed Evelyn a slice, she said I did the dots with a girl named Mari, who never holds the bottle the same way twice, and there was pride that didn't require volume. Robert lifted his water glass. To clarity, he said, and then glanced at me. Not perfection. The clink that followed wasn't choreographed. It sounded like 4 people finding the same pitch by accident. The evening drifted in simple loops, refills a story about Duke discovering the echo under the bungalow porch. Another about a neighbor who taught Robert how to coax a stubborn government website into cooperation. He's there on Tuesdays now at the community center, the table by the vending machines, a stack of forms and a calm voice. They come in angry at systems, he said, shrugging. We leave with a submission number. Some nights that's almost a party. When the cake gave up its last square and the coffee cooled to honesty, Evelyn reached into her bag. I have something, she said, and for once didn't look around to see if we were ready. She set a small box on the table and nudged it toward me with 2 fingers. Inside was a narrow wooden bracelet, warm from the walk, the grain curved like topographic lines around a hill. A small oval sat at the center, a laser-etched blue bonnet, simplified into a stack of strokes that looked exactly like the collage I'd made in 7th grade from grocery receipts and magazine ads. The engraving was shallow enough to catch the light, and deep enough to remember what it meant. I asked a man at the makerspace to help me. Evelyn said, chin lifting, as if to absorb a verdict. Noah. He said you liked birch, but that walnut behaved better for this. She blinked once. I've been learning how to look. It takes longer than I thought. The bracelet fit my wrist like it had studied it. A faint breath of sawdust rose when I turned my hand. I didn't thank the gift for fixing anything. I thanked it for existing. It's good, I said, because praise that tries too hard always feels like advice. Sloane brushed a blue crumb with her thumb and looked at the bracelet, then at me. That flower was stubborn, she said softly. You kept adding scraps until the field showed up. We moved to the couch because dishes had been defeated, and the light from the windows went from gold to the color of cooled steel. Conversation thinned without vanishing. Something from the radio filled the room with a guitar that didn't insist on being named. When silence settled, it did it politely. On their way out, Robert stood in the doorway like a man taking a photograph only he would see later. Your place has good corners, he said. Everything fits because nothing lies. Evelyn hugged me. Not the air near me, but me clean and quick and without commentary. Thank you for dinner, she said. You set the table like it knows us. On the landing, Sloane lingered. I took the long way here, she said, studying the banister as if it had notes. Not because I was avoiding, because I wanted the extra minutes. She squeezed my forearm the way people do when they don't trust the words to hold. Tomorrow morning I'm sending an email that will make my calendar look different, she added, then shook her head as if to push the sentence back inside. Never mind, I'll call you for coffee. After the door closed, the apartment kept the shape we'd made of it. Plates stacked a stray fork at an angle that would drive my mother crazy in a different decade, a thin line of frosting migrating toward the edge of a cake stand. The bracelet sat on my wrist like a small good weight. I rinsed cups and left the rest for morning. The fan made quiet weather overhead. The museum's wall map leaned against a chair. Fingerprints bright in the lamplight, where kids had chosen paths and then changed their minds. On the counter, Hector's tidy printouts waited in a clipped stack, because that's where paper lives here visible, unafraid. Outside, the cicadas turned the night loud and steady, 1,000 clock hands agreeing to move. I stood at the window long enough for my reflection to become just another dark square in a building full of them. The porch light across the street flicked on, then on again, settling where it needed to be. I slid the latch, checked it with my thumb, and let the cool of the glass press against my wrists. The table held its place, the room breathed, the bracelet warmed, and the evening, having done what it came to do, folded itself neatly and stayed. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.